Critical Literature of West Africa from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. She has written a course on Islamic mysticism and one on Western mysticism, which she teaches as well. She also teaches a bachelor's and master's in Islamic mysticism in-house. She has published a collection of short stories fusing esoteric Islam with Western Muslim experience entitled Passing Through the Dream to the Other Side. She also works for the Ahlul Bayt TV. Therefore, without further ado, I'd like to call Dr. Rebecca Masterton.
Everyone's back in time except for me. Sorry about that. I formally converted to Islam in April 1999, and it's difficult to really say in a few words what led up to it, as I suppose everyone has many reasons as to why they end up at that point. I had grown up in a small town near Brighton, which was predominantly, and still is predominantly, English, white. I had one Jamaican friend, and there was one Chinese family who had a Chinese takeaway in the town. And that was all I knew about other cultures. But as I grew up, obviously, I encountered people from the next town, from different cultures, and I started to take visits to London. I made friends with people from London, and they were from all different kinds of backgrounds. I have to kind of say that I've always, and I'll still say the same thing, I've always struggled to fit into the culture that I grew up in. And I don't think it's just because it was, it's not to do with the fact that it was English culture, but it's the fact that most of my family don't believe, they don't really think about the unseen. My mum rejected Christianity many years ago, my brother's an atheist, and religion just wasn't something that was discussed in our family. In fact, my family abided by the unspoken rule that you don't discuss religion and politics with at dinner table. So it's a bit awkward nowadays. But I had also felt that everything kind of looked perfect on the surface. There were some upheavals. My father left when I was 2, and I stopped seeing him, or he stopped seeing me and my brother when I was 5. And there are other upheavals as well, but on the other hand, I did have some stable family. My aunts, my grandparents, all lived a very kind of stable, conservative life in Sussex. But I just felt that there was, it was a kind of a living on the surface, and I think people from any culture can do that, where you live your life. The objective of your life is to have as pleasant a life as possible, and to be well off and comfortable, and to have a nice house and a garden and family, etc. And that is the objective of most members of my family, at least on one side, the side that I grew up with the most. But I just felt oddly suffocated. I mean, people talk about how Islam is oppressive, but I felt suffocated in this way of life that is not actually dealing with the reality of the fact that we exist. What is our existence all about? What are we meant to be doing with this existence? Surely we're not just meant to be kind of driving around, visiting friends and family, earning, a salary. There's got to be more to it than that. And so I was looking around quite obsessively for knowledge. I was also instinctively looking for a path, what I called a path, even though I didn't really have any idea of how that path should appear in my life. But somebody remarked, one of my friends years ago, when I said I'm looking for a path, they said, yeah, you said that before. And so I went to comprehensive school, the usual kind of, life in a small town near Brighton. Around the age of 17, I got to know through some friends an apparent kind of guru who's a kind of a fake guru, but originally from India, who now lives in Malibu, called Maraji. Yeah, he's done well for himself in the last 30 years. And he gets people to do what's called service as well, which means doing his gardening for him and stuff like that. He's kind of readapted all the traditional kind of Hindu aspects of devotion to the peer, I suppose you could say, and he's readapted that to kind of, US capitalist culture, and he's done nicely out of it. So, but he talked about what was called something called knowledge with a capital K, and this was a method. It was a meditation method, which again he'd adapted from the traditional Indian method, and which he taught to his thousands of followers around the world. And his whole thing was about how we all want to be happy and how we can be happy. And I listened to his programs for about 4 years until a friend of mine at the age of 22 died. And at that time, Maraji had come to Brighton, and all the devotees were going to listen to his programs. In the middle of all this, a friend of mine had died, and I was looking at my friends and thinking, okay, so he's died. What does this mean for us? Isn't this something to reflect on? But no reflection. We'll just carry on as we're carrying on. And in addition to that, listening to these endless lectures coming from Maraji wore me out. I did stand up and ask for knowledge with a capital K, and he used me as a kind of example in front of the whole room as to what not to do when you want to ask for knowledge. And on top of that, I had also seen some things that made me kind of uncomfortable, like any time someone stood up to confront him. In fact, this happened at one event in Eastbourne, of all places, at a theatre house, where one lady stood up to confront him, and she was literally, the whole crowd was baying at her, and she was hustled out of the theatre like she was this kind of crazy woman. And I just thought, this isn't compassion, this isn't the way to treat somebody. And so that time in Brighton, I came to the conclusion that this whole thing about what Maraji's talking about, we're supposed to be happy or looking for happiness. And this is making me miserable. It's not making me happy. And I'm quitting. So I stopped going. My friends sort of thought it was a great shame. I was missing out. But then I spent some time, again, reflecting, still this need for this knowledge, the knowledge of the self, really. Where can I find this knowledge of the self? And I've picked up a few books that, the occasional book isn't really sufficient. These teachers that I'd never heard of and probably would never meet, and they've all got their own theories. One thing happened when I was studying in Japan was that on the way back from Japan, I did go via Malaysia. That was in 1991. And that was just for a few days, but that was where I first encountered Muslim culture. So this was after quitting from Maraji and going out to Japan for 2-3 months, which again I found very capitalistic, kind of conformist, empty society. I think they've lost a lot, just as people in the West have also lost a lot. Malaysia was very different, and I just felt I could have easily kind of ended up living there if I had a choice. But I had to come back to the UK, and eventually I moved in with a Moroccan sister who wasn't completely practicing, but she was researching her culture and religion, and I got to know her family quite well, and then she went out to Egypt to study Arabic, and again, I tagged along, got on her nerves, I followed her, basically because I had graduated and I had got a job as a manager of a picture library, art and Asian and African art, photographic picture library, and I was just in a state of, this isn't it, this isn't it. I should have been happy, I've got this job, you know, it's a salary, it's a good start, it's a nice job, but I just was not in a happy state at all, because it's, you know, the big piece of the puzzle has not been resolved. So I thought, right, I'm quitting again, and I'm going to go out to Egypt, and I don't know why I'm going to go out, I'm just going to go out there. I need a break, I need time to think. And so before I went out there, I had a dream that I was in a market wearing white, and I was looking through the rail. It was a market of clothes, and I was looking through the clothes rail, and I picked out a purple hijab. And some of my friends said before I went off, they said, "You're going to come back Muslim." But for me, I think they could see it probably more than I could. And I went out there, and I just felt relief. I just felt at home in a way that I've never done in this country, and started to reflect. I could start to see the way we live here. I'd been in the middle of it, but I felt uncomfortable with it, and I couldn't find a way out of it. But being in Egypt offered me a different perspective, and I was able to reflect on how we live here and where we've gone wrong. We've deviated, in short, we've deviated from our fitra. We might have become very sophisticated. I mean, this is what it's all about in this country, being sophisticated. Most people feel they're too sophisticated for religion. I was thinking, well, yeah, you're very sophisticated, but you've lost it. You've really lost it. You don't know anything about self-knowledge, about existence, about, you know, what this life should be about. It's all superficial. And I used to get, I don't want to be judgmental, but I used to get very, very angry. I was a very angry person most of the time. And coming back from Egypt in '97, I just ended up completely obsessed with Islam. I just seen, again, the way that Muslims interact. I know it's not perfect. I would argue that we're probably, in this day and age, looking at the traces of a great tradition. This is what's left. We've got the traces, but those traces are still there, and they're worth hanging on to. So that's when I came back and started to research into it, and 2 years later took my Shahada, and my Moroccan friends made her very, very uncomfortable, to the point that she eventually stopped speaking to me, and she anyway left to live in another country, and basically that was, I didn't see her anymore. So with her around, ironically, I had to kind of keep my Islam a bit low key, but I think it was difficult to do that. And so from there, it was a very strange feeling of, I mean, people talk about the whole stereotypical thing of coming home, but I think the reason why Islam makes you feel that you are at home is because it's a way of life that keeps you connected to yourself, and through yourself to Allah. That's, your heart is, as I say, home to where my heart is. It doesn't really mean, well, my heart is in Brighton, so that's where my home is. Your heart is here, so your home is there. and that's how I feel.